This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. I used Squarespace to build both Basics with Babish and BingingWithBabish.com. On the sites, you'll find recipes, equipment lists, other news, and updates. All beautifully designed, if I do say so myself. Get 10% off your first Squarespace order by visiting squarespace.com/Babish. Quick reminder, my new cookbook, Basics with Babish, is coming out in almost exactly 1 month. Pre-order at the link in the video description for access to an exclusive recipe. Alright, so today we're going to take a look at a couple different steaks, cooked a couple different ways with a couple different sauces. First up, about as classic as it gets, beef tenderloin, pan-seared, oven-finished, and served with a red wine sauce. One best practice for virtually any steak is to dry brine. That is, to generously coat every facet in kosher salt, place on a rack set in a rim baking sheet, and refrigerate uncovered for 1 to 24 hours. Then, when it comes time to cook, because we want to make a pan sauce, we're going to use a stainless steel pan, generously lubed with a neutral high smoke point oil like vegetable or canola, preheated over medium-high until you start seeing little wisps of smoke coming off the top of the oil, which means that the pan is well over 400 degrees Fahrenheit and ready to receive our padded dry steaks. The objective here is to achieve a deep, dark brown crust on all aspects of the steak as quickly as possible, so over medium-high heat, ideally these guys should be ready to flip within 1 to 2 minutes. The faster we put on a crust, the longer these guys get to gently come up to temp in the oven. They'll be more evenly cooked, they'll lose less juices, and we'll get more time to make a robust pan sauce. So once every facet of the steaks has received some hot pan action, these guys are headed back onto a wire rack set in a rim baking sheet, a temperature probe optionally inserted in the thickest part of the thickest steak, and they're headed into a 225 degree Fahrenheit oven until they reach 10 degrees shy of your desired doneness point. Now we're going to get rid of the spent, darkened oil in the bottom of our pan. Ideally there should be some fond and bits of brown stuff, but no such luck for me. So instead I'm just going to saute half a small minced shallot 1 to 2 minutes over medium heat until softened. Then I'm going to add 1 clove of crushed garlic, let that enjoy the heat for about 30 seconds. Then we're going to deglaze the pan with 3/4 of a cup each dry red wine and beef stock, preferably some concentrated super gelatinous homemade beef stock like this stuff, and preferably a much less purple wine than the one that I used, but we'll fix that later. I'm also going to add a sprig of rosemary, a dried bay leaf, and a couple parsley stems I have lying around. We're bringing this mixture up to an aggressive simmer so that we can reduce it by more than half until it has a thick, almost syrupy quality. Now, it was at this point that I realized that my Malbec was not going to yield the correct color. So for both flavor bolstering and color correction, I'm adding a tablespoon of tomato paste, continuing to reduce until delightfully thick and viscous. At this point, we're going to kill the heat entirely, and once the last bubble has broken through the surface, we're going to start whisking in a whole lot of unsalted butter. Reduced red wine is very acidic, so we need at least 3 to 4 tablespoons. Taste for seasoning, adjust with kosher salt, freshly ground pepper, and/or more butter, and whisk until thick, glossy, and, well, buttery. Strain out all the solids through a fine mesh sieve and keep warm until ready to serve. Meanwhile, our steaks are up to temp. I was shooting for 120, but hit more like 125. Now we're going to loosely tent them in foil and let them rest for about 10 minutes, during which time their temp is going to rise another 7 to 10 degrees. Hence why we pull them out of the oven 10 degrees shy of where we want them to be. If your fillets are tied, don't forget to snip those strings. Unwrap carefully because depending on what part of the tenderloin they're from, they can be delicate, and you can either serve whole or slice. The grain in a fillet runs top to bottom, and if you slice, you want to slice across that grain. So for presentation's sake, this usually means slicing on the diagonal, cutting into medallions that can be fanned out to display how perfectly cooked your steaks are. Spread them out on maybe a bigger plate than this. I'm just doing this for food styling. Sorry this is out of focus, but we're garnishing with parsley, flaky salt, freshly ground pepper, a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, and of course, our red wine sauce. So if this is the sort of traditional forward sear method, what about the reverse sear? As its name suggests, it is the same process, but in reverse. This time I've got a bone-in New York strip. I'm inserting the temperature probe at its thickest point nearest to the bone, and sending it into the oven until it reaches 115 degrees Fahrenheit, during which time I'm going to make a delicious compound butter for serving. I've got 1 stick of room temperature unsalted butter. I'm adding half a finely minced shallot, 1 clove of garlic that I'm lightly crushing, chopping, and finely mincing. The more you break it down, the more garlic flavor you're going to get. I'm also going to add a half teaspoon of chopped fresh thyme and about a 1/4 cup of finely chopped fresh parsley. There's a bunch of different herbs that you could mix and match here: tarragon, dill, marjoram, rosemary. Then of course we need to season with a hefty pinch of kosher salt, a few twists of freshly ground black pepper, and a little pinch of optional chili flakes if you want a little bit of heat. Mash that nonsense together with a fork and set aside until ready to serve. Speaking of ready to serve, our steak is headed out of the oven. It's hit 115 degrees Fahrenheit at its thickest point. Overshot it last time, so I'm trying to undershoot it this time. Pat it dry. If any moisture is accumulated on the outside, yank out the temperature probe and bring it over to the stovetop, where we have a preheated cast iron pan generously coated with neutral oil and heated to smoking. Just like last time, we're trying to blast it with as much heat as possible so that we form a crust as quickly as possible. The internal temp is going to rise anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees, so we got to work quickly. If your stove has a fat cap, make sure to sear that. It's been well rendered, and browning it will make it look and taste delicious. Remove from the heat, back onto a wire rack, temp with foil, and let rest for 10 minutes before carving. I'm going to start by slicing it off of the attached bone, and once again slicing the steak on a slight bias. This is going to cut across more muscle fibers, making it more tender for the human mouth. Go ahead and serve this fanned out next to the bone if desired, with plenty of compound butter, ideally immediately smeared over top so that it starts melting, creating a glistening burnished steak dotted with herbs and garlic. Maybe one of my very favorite things to look at. Serve with a nice crisp salad, maybe some baby kale with a mustard vinaigrette. So that's both forward and reverse searing, techniques ideal for thicker steaks, but what about a thinner steak like a flank? This is a versatile, slightly less expensive cut that's also thin enough that we need to just sear it until it's done. So to help it develop a crust faster, I'm going to make a mixture of 2 tablespoons of kosher salt to 1 teaspoon of white sugar. The sugar is going to help a crust form more quickly so that the steak doesn't overcook by the time we get some good color on it. Same procedure as before, lightly coat all sides, place on a rack, set in a rim baking sheet, and refrigerate for 1 to 24 hours. Now if you're going to do the whole flank, your best move is to grill it. Preheat the grill on high for 10 to 15 minutes until it's ripping hot. Lower the heat to medium high and lay down the steak on the diagonal. After about 3 minutes, go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees so you get the nice crosshatch pattern. Repeat on the other side and grill until the thickest point registers about 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't be afraid to flip it if things start darkening too quickly. But most flank steaks that you find in the grocery store are available like this, in chunks. Same rules apply, but this smaller form factor means that we can make it in a pan. Now, flank steak more often than not is served with sort of a dressing rather than a sauce. So once this guy's cooked through and he's got a nice deep golden brown crust and he's resting for the requisite 10 minutes, we're going to make a dressing that's sort of halfway between a mojo and a chimichurri. Starting with 1/3 cup of extra virgin olive oil, the juice of 1 orange, the juice of 1 lime, anywhere from 1 to 4 cloves of garlic, crushed. Also, sorry, the battery in my mic died, so no audio from this point on. About a half teaspoon of chopped fresh oregano or 1 teaspoon of dried oregano. About a 1/4 cup of chopped cilantro, or in my case, parsley leaves, because I'm one of those annoying people who doesn't like cilantro. Then I'm also going to add a couple thinly sliced scallion greens, but you could use shallot or any other oniony flavor. A little splash of red wine vinegar, maybe 2 splashes. A teaspoon of whole cumin seeds for a nice flavorful pop. Seasoning to taste with kosher salt and freshly ground black pepper. And I'm also going to add about 2 teaspoons of honey for a surprise pop of sweetness. And of course some optional red chili flake if you want a little bit of heat. Go ahead and tiny whisk this until it's well emulsified, adding more fruit juice or vinegar if it's too oily, or more oil if it's too watery. Our steak is freshly rested, and as you can see, it's got a very pronounced grain structure. Particularly with flank steak, it's important that we slice thinly and across the grain. It's going to make the difference between the steak being tender and toothsome or chewy and terrible. It's helpful to use a long, thin carving knife so that you can slice the steak as thinly as possible. As you can see, even with a proper rest, we're still going to lose some juices. That's okay, because we have a bright, bracing, garlicky, and slightly sweet dressing. It's going to play really nicely with the grassy, mineral-forward flavors of a flank. Go ahead and garnish with a few more thinly sliced scallions, sprinkle with flaky finishing salt, maybe a few twists of pepper. You've got the perfect steak to whip up quickly for a crowd, or just for you if you're really, really hungry. But this steak makes for great leftovers. Steak salad, steak and eggs, steak tacos, you name it. I hope you guys saw some stuff that you want to try yourself. Lots of tips and tricks like these are going to be in my new book, Basics with Babish, available October 24th. Pre-order now and get access to an exclusive recipe. Check out the link in the video description. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. They've been a great partner in supporting the Babish culinary universe and bringing my websites to life. From websites to online stores to domains and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for you to build your online presence. They also have SEO tools so that your site is getting found and searched by more people more often. If you want to try it for yourself, you can start your free trial today by visiting squarespace.com/Babish to get 10% off your first purchase.